Alright, let's get into it. Today, we're breaking down a massive game of geopolitical chicken that played out in the world's most critical waterway. We're going to look at what happens when an incredible military threat gets met with a surprisingly simple act of defiance. So what really happens when a superpower draws a line in the sand, and the other side just casually steps right over it? We're going to unpack how a full US naval blockade of Iran was challenged almost immediately, turning a huge show of force into a really high-stakes political gamble. First things first, to really get what's going on, we have to understand the playing field. Why is this one narrow strip of water, the Strait of Hormuz, so important that it can bring entire nations to the brink of conflict? Yeah, so this isn't just some random channel. The Strait of Hormuz is basically the planet's energy lifeline. A huge chunk of the world's oil and gas flows right through here. So any disruption, even a small one, sends massive shockwaves through the global economy. It's a constant point of tension. Long before any ships were actually stopped, the air was already electric with tension. Washington and Tehran were locked in this really fierce war of words. Both were threatening to seize control of this vital waterway, basically daring the other one to make the first move. It was a total powder keg. And that brings us to the first major move on the board. So let's break down exactly what the United States did, and just as importantly, how they explained it to the world. The American action was really decisive, really direct. There was no ambiguity here. The goal was to apply maximum economic pressure by basically sealing Iran off from the sea, which, is a massive part of their economy. And here is the official justification. The US was very careful not to frame this as the first move, but as a retaliation. By labeling what Iran was doing as economic terrorism, they built this narrative that the blockade was just a necessary tit-for-tat response, basically a two-can-play-at-that-game strategy. The demand itself was incredibly simple and totally absolute. Iran had to immediately stop any and all restrictions on shipping, period. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a clear ultimatum, and it was backed by the full force of the US Navy. Okay, so the blockade is officially in place. How did Iran respond? Well, they didn't just back down. In fact, they almost immediately launched this very calculated two-front counter strategy. Iran's initial response was just one of pure defiance. Top officials didn't just dismiss the American threat, they were publicly mocking it, saying that these, quote, aggressive maneuvers were doomed to fail. And this slide right here lays out their two-pronged strategy perfectly. So step one was all about economic damage control. Ramp up trade over land with your neighbors to just bypass the sea altogether. But step two was the real gamble. Directly challenge the naval blockade at sea and test America's resolve head-on. And then, suddenly, all eyes on the entire planet were on this one ship. The Rich Starry, a tanker that was already under US sanctions, was about to become the very first test of the blockade's strength and really of America's will to enforce it. The timeline here is just stunning. Think about this. Less than 24 hours after this massive naval blockade was announced to the world, it was directly and successfully challenged. This immediately raised huge questions about whether it was actually effective at all. And the details of this ship are just fascinating. It almost feels like it was designed to provoke. You've got a Chinese-owned tanker whose owner is also sanctioned, and it's flying the flag of Malawi, a landlocked country in Africa. Every single detail here just made its passage that much more politically explosive. And then came the 21st Century Victory Lap, straight-up mockery on social media. This post from the Iranian embassy was just a masterclass in modern psychological warfare. They're using humor to frame this powerful American blockade as, like, a minor inconvenience, something you could just pay a premium to bypass, like skipping ads on a streaming service. So let's look at the fallout. With the blockade's credibility blown up less than a day after it started, the entire strategic game just seemed to change overnight. And here is the pivot. After that big show of force completely failed to intimidate, the entire strategy appeared to shift almost immediately from confrontation back to negotiation. All of a sudden, there were reports that the US was ready to get back to the diplomatic table. This really suggests that the reality on the ground forced a super rapid reevaluation. Reports started coming out that former President Trump was already pushing for a new round of talks, possibly within 48 hours. I mean, that is a remarkably fast pivot back to diplomacy. But let's be clear, this was not a surrender. The US position for any potential deal was still firm. Diplomatic sources made it plain that while talks might be back on the table, the core demands hadn't changed at all. The onus, they said, was still on Iran to deal with its nuclear program and its activities in the region. And so all of this leaves us with a really critical question. When a public display of incredible military might gets neutralized so quickly and so publicly, what does that tell us about the nature of power today? This whole episode is a pretty stark reminder that in our complex, interconnected world, maybe the old rules of conflict just don't apply anymore.